Growing up as I did, in All Saints Street, it was natural to assume that what was there had long been unchanged, but nothing could really be further from the truth. Everything was and had been in a state of flux, too confusing really for a child to understand. I knew, for instance, that the chapel at the corner of Courthouse Street and Bourne Street was not old, but for the children there was no sense of how recently or how long ago it had all changed. Only later, experiencing the changes that then took place, was it possible to realise what those earlier changes had meant for the people who experienced them. Looking back now, it requires an effort of imagination to try to feel how differently things were seen and done over 100 years ago, especially in an area that now seems quaint, to realise that then it seemed normal, and that modern perception of history, of the age and picturesqueness of surviving buildings had nothing of the same appeal. The insistence of George Davis, for instance, that the two cottages at number 1 and 2 All Saints Street, built before 1610, should be pulled down, is not easy to comprehend in an age of conservation and sensitivity to the persistence of the material past. My own earliest recollections of All Saints Street are of the years of the Second World War. At that time, Doucher's Passage separated Archie Doucher's general shop from Blackman's, the baker's. Further down the high pavement was Mr. Leach, the grocer, then White's, the other baker. At the bottom of Wood's Passage was a fish and chip shop, and at the bottom of East Hill Passage a newsagent, who sold at the time second-hand copies of the Gem and the Magnet, but not so, as I remember after the evacuation, newspapers, which were the sole prerogative of Charlie Bourne at number 63, who delivered our papers daily. Until the outbreak of the war, there had been other shops, notably Glazier's, which was locally known as the Big Shop, but which closed probably at the time of evacuation and never reopened. I have some hazy and unreliable memories of the earlier years, of Rees, the Italian ice cream makers, before the days of Ball's powder mix. Also I remember watching, fascinated by an elderly man repairing broken china by drilling and riveting the pieces together. Just around the corner into Courthouse Street was Kennard's Dairy, where I remember being sent with a white china jug to fetch a pint of milk, dipped into the churn with a long-handled ladle. I recall only 3 pubs, the Stag, the Crown and the Cinque Port Arms. The George Inn at number 120 was still listed in 1940, but must have closed shortly after the war ended. I haven't been able to discover as yet when the Wilderness was built, but it is marked on Grant's map of 1852. I have a photograph of myself at about 4 years old, which shows in the background the chimneys of the Wilderness, but I remember only the empty site, the ruins of the tiled floors of the cellars, and the remains of some brick arches that were part of the cellar walls. The description, on an auctioneer's brochure, was a splendid freehold residence with grounds and stables. The demolition was certainly part of the scheme to build the infamous Bourne Road. The community of All Saints Street was slightly different in the early 20th century, with 50 of the 136 houses being some sort of shop, with many people selling out of their homes. Although these stores were in gradual decline, in May 1933, Hastings Council presented the Bourne clearance, when the Ministry of Health ordered all local authorities to prepare new slum clearances. One day before the deadline, a special council meeting had decided on only clearing the middle of the old town, coinciding with a previously denied proposal to build what is now the Bourne Road. 190 houses were to be demolished, and 739 people thrown out of their homes in a 2.7-acre area. Eviction sites. Councillor Tingle described it as an act of robbery. The staggering scale of this crime only became apparent over the next few months, when it emerged that because the buildings had been labelled slums, the council would only have to pay site value for them instead of market value, which was the reason the road was denied in the original instance. This was made worse by the fact that many had previously owned these homes and now had to pay high rents for the new government housing. But in order to make sure that the Minister of Health approved the declaration of the slum clearance, the council pretended that there was no scheme and all the houses were slums, which they were clearly not. There is no doubt that many houses in the old town were in poor condition, lacking basic amenities and often being overcrowded. Nobody denied this, but many reject the slum label, saying that the selective demolition of the worst properties and encouragement to renovate the rest could have kept the physical charm and character of the old town intact, and preserved the fishing community that had had its home there for many centuries. Many of today's desirable cottages in and around All Saints Street could just have easily been labelled slums in 1930, but Hastings Council decided not to save the old town. Instead, the council, in perhaps its most short-sighted and callous act, tore the heart out of the old town, impoverishing and scattering many of its inhabitants to make way for a road that only decimated a community.